Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1041. Dig Dim Blood. Dig Dim Blood, Leave 102. Seth remembered the name, the moment he saw the tied-up creature. It was the cobbler Strike had talked about. Like Forebone, he was a tiny man, his height barely reaching Seth's upper thigh. However, it took too bulky. His moss-green suit, flaming red hair, and a scraggly beard were all messed up with dirt and blood. It seemed like catching him was quite the struggle. Behind him were three others of similar level. A pale, haggard person with big golden frog eyes and slimy green hair. He wore a coat decorated with shells. The next one was a bipedal creature covered in fur. It wore a pair of dirty leather pants, but it would have been a reach to call it humanoid. The last one was a man who looked like he was carved from wood. Similar to Dig, they were tied up and held down by teams of golems. Was this the court that the drunk shoemaker was talking about before falling asleep? After many difficulties, we caught them in a satellite city north of Y City. With its distance to the central city, there have been many more people who survived the scene's purge. Ultimately this did not help them. Coldly and objectively the orc general described the state they found at the place. Vega spoke of venues for blood games, where people were forced to fight and kill each other. Scenes of torture so graphic even Seth felt shocked. People who died from throb vines penetrating and growing through their bodies, turning into bizarre works of art. Heaps of gnawed-off bones. Flooded underground facilities turned into submerged caverns and filled with drowned zombies. When they attacked us in the same ways, it became overwhelmingly clear that these creatures and their underlings were the perpetrators. Vega Gores finished his horrid tale. The orc golem behind him had been nodding here and there, when he judged these deeds harshly during his explanation. Even these orc-turned golem felt aversion to such practices. Ah, what with the shocked face. Are you our judge? Are you going to spout some nonsense about justice now, before executing us? Save it. The only thing I regret is that there weren't more pets to play with. Dim Blood mocked him with crazy laughter. The others didn't seem as enthusiastic about the cause, but they all looked at him in defiance. And fear. But mostly defiance. Some people would have condemned killing captives, but not Seth. Not after everything he heard. As the leader of Minas Mar, he was also technically justified in punishing people in some circumstances. But this was not about justice. This was greed with a smidgen of revenge. Don't worry, this will only hurt for a moment, Seth said without engaging in a battle of words or ideals. Let's see what the soul of a twisted little shit like you looks like. The maximum level of spirit capture came with two perks. The first was that Seth was able to widen the area of effect for capturing the souls of undead and those close to death. The other perk was soul robbery, a single target attack that allowed him to even harvest the souls of the living and healthy. However, it had a chance to fail if the target was too strong. Dig's eyes ripped open wide when the blacksmith struck his chest. His hand wearing the wraith guard, formed like the bloody claw of a bird of prey that descended to grasp his meal. There was no blood or wound in the cobbler's chest, but he felt like the claw had caught his heart. His defiance, his confidence, his animalistic joy for the suffering of others, he felt his very self being pulled into a void. His limbs went limp. Sound vanished. His eyes were blind. His world became dark, cold, and silent. Dig Dim Blood wasn't the only one in a whirl of emotions. Seth's heart also raced, when he pulled out the soul and appraised it. Soul of Dig Dim Blood, massive, ego, epic, crafting material. The soul of a leprechaun, a greedy fairy cobbler with a fondness for sadistic and lethal mischief. A species with a peculiar connection to money and fortune. Soul retained 98% of its original skills and memory. Peculiar connection to money and fortune. Fortune. In other words, luck. It became clear when Seth searched through the skill list and quickly realized that he finally had the fitting soul for his lucky trinket ring. The skill list revealed three peculiarities about the leprechaun. The first was the trait Lepresian's Fortune, which raised the luck attribute by 25. The second was the ability to temporarily raise his luck by sacrificing something of worth, such as currency or a treasure. Lastly, there was something called a geese. The leprechaun had to serve whoever caught them until they managed to flee. In exchange they gained the power to become invisible when not observed and treasure detection, a skill that allowed them to sense precious objects. This was the first time Seth heard about this. The geese was listed separately and was neither skill, ability, nor trait. The bard looked at the rest of Dim Blood's group. Was this what made the creatures that appeared after the awakening so weird? There was only one way to find out. One by one, 3 more corpses were added to Dimblood on the pavement. Unlike Diggs, they fell just short of being massive, meaning he earned 3 big ego souls. All of them were epic rated, and when he checked the skills, he found all of them had a geese. The hairy beast was called a troll, which confused Seth a little, but he accepted that it was probably Earth's version of one. The soul's description called it a crude and violent beast, fitting most trolls he knew. The troll's geese was a 90% immunity to physical damage, but in exchange, it would turn into brittle stone under the direct sunlight. The haggard beast with the froggy eyes was called a shellcoat, a creature that indulges in drowning its victims. Its skill was all water-based, and in geese was that it would lose no stamina in water, in exchange for only living off the flesh of sentient beings. Lastly, the wooden man. The soul description called the creature a forest scrat. Judging by its skill, one could call it a wood sorcerer born from a forest. It had a high affinity with earth and water, with magic for growing trees and plants. Its geese was that it would not lose mana inside a forest in exchange for being severely weakened outside of woods. These 4 examples were enough for Seth to make a guess about the geese. The closest he knew in the context of the system were traits. But unlike traits which usually had a specific effect without a price, a geese came as a trade-off. One got an ability or power that was strong to the point that it might even circumvent the established rules of the system, but in exchange, it came with a great disadvantage. Something like a 90% reduction of physical damage, or resources like mana and stamina not running out were already in the realm of legendary effects, despite their holders not even passing Leave 110. This explained the rule-defying witness reports he heard about. Some effects of geese worked like a bug or glitch in the system. A creature that could keep casting spells without depleting mana? Anyone would find that weird. After dealing with the captives, Seth had Vegagors and his colleague, the 2 bosses, give him an update on their progress. The golems had been working faster than he expected, already widening their circles to the north, west, and south. Especially the south, with the ruins and slums that had already been abandoned before the fall would take a long time to clean up. They avoided the east because of Baker's warnings. The golems were here to grow, not to be repeatedly beaten. There was no need for risks. We have also collected more loot, Vagi Nertz, the second golem general with a massive soul, mentioned as they guided him to a mountain of treasures. The golems had no crates or other things to store the items and jewelry, so they had piled it up to an almost 10-meter high mountain. Despite holding a lot of trash, too, Seth felt a little overwhelmed at the sight. He gulped. I guess, I will have to sort this out before returning. Chapter 1042 Soul Refinery goes brrrrrr. Seth quickly sifted through the pile of items. The system money quickly found its way into his inventory. Among the things the golems had collected were also credit cards, however, at this point in time these cards were useless. They were useless because most of the banks and institutes supporting them were now gone. The destruction of Y-City had also wiped out most of the big conglomerate families still left in the districts, many of which had been part of the scene. With the greatest backer behind the credits gone, the Erdhan credits had weakened a lot. They were still an accepted currency, even in Myanmar, but the focus had shifted to the convenient and now easier to use system currency, which was supported by a literal god. Much of the heap was also common items. The golems had no appraisal, so they collected everything that seemed of worth. The only things worth keeping among the common items were gold, silver, or platinum items like jewelry. Even with the existence of magical ores, these materials still had their worth. It took hours to go through the whole heap and sort the loot into different trucks. Seth only had so many inventory slots, and without crates or chests, he wasn't able to store huge amounts of individual items. He also wasn't in the mood to fashion hundreds of quests at the moment. So he just sorted the stuff, with some help from Puffles, and put it on the various vehicles the golems had acquired to transport the stuff. You should deliver these things to TS-12 before entering the abandoned ruins, Seth finally ordered Vega and Vagi, once everything was in order. You can everything except this one and the ones with resources to Mark Baker, he added, slapping the truck that was filled with looted polyarcanate armor and some other epic items. The 2 golem orc generals nodded. Apart from items reserved for the use by Myanmar, the loads of resources were the common items like jewelry that could still serve as practice items for their enchanters. Alright, let's get back, Puffles. Getting on the back of the nightmare centipede, Seth returned to TS-12 and from there to Myanmar as quickly as possible. He finally had a soul for his lucky trinket and he intended to finish it as quickly as possible. However, by the time he finally returned, it was already late. Tord and Hone had already finished for the day, only Sivri and Cerberus were still in the workshop, working. Since everyone else had left, Sivri was back to making things from the Tempest copper. Seth, you are back? It's quite late. She said surprised. At this point, it was already late and he didn't expect him to come to the workshop, instead of going to his room to sleep. Yeah, but I have to do something, or it will keep me awake for the night, Seth explained and took off the lucky trinket. It was a ring he made, quite some time ago at this point. It was made with one of the few minerals with a connection to luck, fortune glass. Al herself had enchanted it for him, to aid him, especially during crafting. He had been looking for a fitting soul for a long time. Everything else was prepared and only waiting for one. Now he finally had one. What blessing he would put on his ring of fortune? Was that even a question? Of course, it was going to be the blessing of Hades. Of course, one could argue that Hades was not the god of fortuitous outcomes or luck, but he was literally the god of fortune, as in riches. Taking into account that he did not have access to the blessing of Taichi, this blessing had the best chance for a great outcome. Especially since the specifics of the soul he finally got, fit Hades much better. But before he could start, he had to prepare the soul. After all, it had an ego. Dig Dimblood was not the kind of personality he wanted to wear on his hand. The blacksmith also had no intention to make a deal with the creature. Unfortunately, he also couldn't use the method of suppressing the original ego with the automaton core circuit. From experience he knew that he would need the space for the blessing of Hades. This only left doing it by an or soul refinery goes brrrrrr. What Seth really needed out of the Leprosian soul was his affinity to luck and the ability to buff luck with precious things. However, considering the creature's vast array of other skills, Seth kept a few more that fit the ring and would be helpful to him in the future. What he definitely filtered out was the geese. Seth already possessed a superior way to become invisible. The blacksmith was glad he had the soul refinery and he thought he finally understood its true worth. Forgebrand would have had a high-level spirit capture from the beginning and easily reached Seth's current point. He had faced the drawbacks of well-preserved souls early, especially in the shape of willful egos. For the soul to retain a lot of its knowledge, memory, or skill was good if he intended to create a golem, but there was too much if it was about imbuing it into an item. Manually refining such a full soul would take a long time, so his dwarven predecessor came up with a method to automate it. While refining Dig Dimblood's soul, he found another peculiarity of the geese. It was woven into the soul, almost like the power of God stained the souls of their priests and strong believers. Refining away the geese completely was next to impossible, this was why Seth decided on something else. Instead of refining out the geese and the Leprosian's ego, he split it off. This cost him some of the size of the soul, turning it into a big soul at the threshold of massive. On the other hand, he had a medium-sized soul with an ego and the geese. Why did he sacrifice some of the power to do this? Curiosity. Seth wanted to see what would happen if he set this soul into a golem. Would the golem inherit the geese? If he used the automaton core and a soul contract to bind him, would he count as permanently caught? If he was caught and started to serve an enemy, would the soul contract allow him to simply retrieve the soul? He could send him to spy and if he got caught and betrayed him because of the geese, he would die and Seth could retrieve the soul. The thought was funny. It was like a consumable spy. All he would lose was the golem's body. There was already a lot he could do with just this soul's geese, what about the others? A geese had a big drawback for the being it originally belonged to, but not to Seth. The blacksmith could freely choose what body to insert the soul. For example, the unlimited stamina when in water. What if Seth used the soul and Forgebrand's original golem formation to create a water golem? Would it have unlimited stamina no matter where, since it was made of water? Like this, he could choose items or materials that negated the drawback. This new power had great potential if it worked as he hoped for. But for now, he had more important work. With Dig's soul refined, he could start forging it into a mirror image of his lucky trinket. That was not had, since it was a simple ring with only a small stone set at the top. What he had to mentally prepare for was the enchanting. It had been a while since he engraved a blessing and he had to get prepared for the presence of a god to look over his shoulder. Taking a deep breath, he stretched himself and then got to it. The sigil of Hades was the symbol of his helmet, the helm of darkness, with a stylized flame to the left and right of it. The familiar pressure weighed on his shoulders the moment he put down the engraving tool. It was a presence he had already felt twice before. One when he created his helm of Hades, a copy of the god's armament, and when he visited his temple in Krna. Like the previous 2 times, he could not feel any malice in the presence of the ruler of the underworld. Calm and serious, maybe a little cold, but also unexplainably reliable. Despite having no bad intention, the presence alone made the blacksmith sweat as he slowly and deliberately carved the fine sigil onto the soul ring. It was not a big pattern, or a complicated one, but each stroke cost him immense concentration. However, compared to before, he also felt a lot calmer. Not because of calm mind, but because of his increased skill, experience, and support items. Soon, Seth completed the last stroke of the sigil and finished the carving. Like before, a pattern started spreading, starting from the sigil. It was a pattern of angular swirls, like stylized floods of fire and smoke, at the same seemingly time cold and controlled. He felt something almost like a pat on the shoulder before the presence vanished. The blessing was finished. He took a moment to calm down before continuing with the next step, infusing the soul ring into the lucky trinket and baptizing it in the waters of Styx. Ding! You have finished a unique item. Plus 100p of power of existence. Chapter 1043 Final Trinket. The first surprise was that he got 100 points of power of existence for a unique item. Seth knew that unique was not bound by the usual rating. A unique item could be worse than something uncommon, or better than something epic. Did that mean the lucky trinket was now considered to be on the same level as a legendary item? Inadvertently, his eyes jumped to the ring, that was still floating in the bubble of water, and appraised it. Lucky trinket. Unique. 1 plus 80 luck. 2 wearer is a bit favored by fortune. 3 superior mining plus 5. 4 the chance of dropping a soul is increased by 25%. 5 vestiges of dim blood. 6 feather fall. 7 75% curse resistance. 8 passive skill, little Laplace. 9 active skill, pot of gold. A simple looking ring with a very rare effect made in the cooperation of Master Smith. The first Master Goldsmith of Earth, and Alzalsar, the legendary sorceress and dragon slayer. The perfect gift for any gambler or a big help to many craftsmen. Seth almost dropped his hammer, upon seeing the ring. He forgot all about the effect at the sight of the flavor text. Alzalsar, the legendary sorceress and dragon slayer. Alzalsar had reached the legendary rank. Not just that, she had actually succeeded in fulfilling her dream of killing a dragon. That was the only way to attain the title of Dragon Slayer. Of course, Seth had never doubted her for even a moment. But he still couldn't help but gawk at the description, as it seemed almost surreal. The sorceress was still the strongest person Seth could imagine, and she was not even a legend during that time. How much stronger would she have become by becoming a dragon slayer? Seth had a hard time imagining someone as unfathomable as Elle, to become even stronger. He probably stared at the floating ring for almost half an hour, his thoughts constantly circling and trying to grasp what it meant. He only calmed down after coming to the conclusion that he would probably never find out. At least not, until Al returned someday. Calmer now, he focused on the finally finished ring. The first change was that the additional luck and jumped from 50 to 80. The second was that the wording had changed from slightly, to a bit favored by fortunes. The third was pretty glaring, as the blessing of Hades gave an additional 5 levels to superior mining, meaning that the skill was at max leave when he wore this ring. Another addition of the blessing was the increased chance to drop souls from normal kills, which was very welcome. The fifth effect of the ring was the effect of the things he left on the soul after refining. Dim Blood's vestiges were the remains of the part Seth found useful. The effect improved the performance of leather wares he produced by 15%, which was welcome since he probably made more of them in the future, now that he was working on his sewing. It also lowered the cost of his enchantments by 5%. This didn't sound like a lot, and its use was ambiguous since he usually inserted a soul into items that would bear the cost of these enchantments, making them virtually permanent or free. However, they still had to be paid, which was why free skills usually had at least a cooldown. So apart from lowering the cost of items he made for ordinary people, it would also lower the cooldown on the skill of items, or improve the performance of effects. At least he was sure there was nothing negative about it. Lastly, Dim Blood's vestiges increased the power of curses by 20%. Seth was not a shaman or dark magician, but he used a lot of demonic skills through his armor and song. As long as the effects counted as curses, they would be improved, which seemed like a good deal to him. Finally, on the last spot, was the skill that really mattered, Pot of Gold. Active skill, Pot of Gold, no cooldown, special cost. Pot of gold allows the user to increase their luck attribute by 5 to 20 minutes in exchange for paying an appropriate price in the shape of sacrificing valuable objects. The value of an item is judged by the demand for it in the world. The greater the value, the greater the improvement and duration. Seth frowned a little since there was no way to know what the value was, without trying it first. Why couldn't things be convenient for once and come with the power to see this value of items beforehand? Oh, well. Mumbling, he pulled out a single copper coin and threw it in the air. Spinning in the air, it started glowing and vanished. Ding! Your attribute, luck, had increased by 0.001 for 5 minutes. Making a quick calculation, he pulled out 10 silver coins and threw them in the air. Ding! Your attribute, luck, had increased by 1 for 5 minutes. Okay, so at least things scaled linearly. This meant a gold coin would. Ding! Your attribute, luck, had increased by 5 for 10 minutes. Or not. Instead of raising his luck by 10 for 5 minutes when he sacrificed a gold coin, it was 5 luck but doubled the duration. Fine, be like that then. Seth huffed and puffed. At least it didn't randomly have. He had enough gold to play this game, or he could try sacrificing some of his products. However, he was pissed for now. He didn't intend to waste any more stuff. He didn't plan to do anything more today. He had achieved his objective, he could test around at another time. Have a good night, Sivri. I will. You also have a good night, she answered, turning back to her jewelry. Seth vanished from the workshop and speared directly on his bed. He had an eventful day and gratefully fell asleep. Tong tong tong, tong tong tong. Wild knocking on the door awoke him from his peaceful slumber. How dare they disturb his well-deserved sleep? He would show them what happened to those whose sleepy thoughts filled his head as he crawled off the bed. Before he could elaborate on his divine rage on those messing with his beauty sleep, he had to release his kraken. Which meant, he skedaddled to the toilet, ignoring the intense knocking on the door. It was a little annoying during the release, but the kraken was in a hurry. After he unleashed the mythical creature, he flushed it into freedom and went to the door, after washing his hands. He was awake enough to remember basic decency, now. The thoughts of divine punishment had also subsided. If they were this persistent, it was probably important. What is it? The blacksmith asked sleepily. The messenger stared in silence, surprised at the door that suddenly opened. What is it? Did you knock? The door would open at some point, or why did you keep knocking? Seth asked in annoyance. Ah, sorry, Tower Master. I just didn't expect it anymore. Ladies Mary, Lena, and Love ask for your immediate presence. Important guests have arrived unexpectedly. Unexpected guests, the bard asked slowly. Master Mountain and a friend have come with a request, he explained with a bow. Seth scratched his head, as the info sank in. You should have said so from the start. I will wash up and be there in a hot minute. Cinema Dimension. He finally used your blessing, aren't you happy, uncle? Hephaestus asked Hades jovially. Although the god of craftsmen was of the opinion that there could have been better souls out there, for what the little blacksmith had, it was a very good piece. I don't know what you are talking about, Hades countered with his same stoic expression. Right, this was the serious Hades they knew. However, while the others couldn't read the dark god's face, there was someone who could. Persephone had a mischievous smile on her face, seeing the truth. Her husband was struggling not to smile. She could see it at the corner of his mouth. His gentle hands suddenly moved and she hugged his arm. He looked over at her and stopped resisting the smile. She had given him an excuse to smile, saving his reputation and earning one of his few bright smiles. He didn't say anything, but his eyes conveyed his feelings stronger than 1,000 words. Ugh! The gods around could not take the brightness of the moment and turned away. Their attention was drawn away from the couple, when a figure that had been missing for a while, finally returned. The system god was back. Chapter 1044 Master Mountain and a Friend. Seth didn't dawdle and got himself presentable before he hurried to the elevator to the embassy. A staff member already waited for the blacksmith and guided him to one of the guest rooms on the upper floors. He was looking forward to meeting Master Mountain, not just because they had become quite friendly with each other, but also because he was their best source for information on this breed of people called cultivators. Most important was the news, because of their last meeting with him. Seth had decided to tell him everything about the system god, after which you had set off in a hurry, to prevent the worst. They could only hope he returned with good news. Seated in a warmly decorated living room, Seth found Lena, Mary, and Love, sitting with Master Mountain and another man dressed in the typical robes of the voracious cloud continent. This had to be the friend, the messenger mentioned earlier. Seth, my friend, the old man rose from the ground to welcome him. You. It's great to see you. It's been a while, Seth greeted him with a short hug and the ladies with a nod, before looking at Yu's friend expectantly. This is my old friend Xiongpeng, the Soaring Eagle and sect master of the Snow Falcon sect. I met him on the way here and I brought him along because he needs your help, he explained, seeing Seth's look. Our help? Seth asked curiously. Although the blacksmith had not the best opinion of cultivators, Yu was a good example of the circumstance, that not all of them were bad. Someone introduced by him was probably worth knowing. It was always good to have some trustworthy relationships, disregarding their origin. After Seth and Master Mountain sat back down, Xiongpeng started reiterating what he had already told the ladies while they were waiting for Seth. It was a story about his granddaughter and a group of inner disciples vanishing in the northeastern mountains. The northeastern mountains? Close to the Sigma Sea? Seth asked with a frown. Lena had a similar face. Although that direction was objectively safer than the rest, there were things one had to be careful of. Past the mountains were the remains of Sigma, which still held a connection to the abyss and its ethnarchs. The mountains themselves were infested with flying beasts, especially surrounding the sea. It was also in that direction that they had met creatures like the Nukkalavi, a terrifying and virtually immortal creature. On another note, further east was also the place where Seth met Chrysopras, the mountain giant. It was also the general direction where he killed the Zarkist saint. There was a possibility that there were still remaining Zarkists, mindlessly roaming the mountains. But hey, it was still better than that accursed forest, or the damned undead and their plague. Seth didn't voice out all the dangers. He suddenly remembered one by one and simply listened to the story. I already asked my other disciples to look for them, but they couldn't find a trace of them. They are just too few to cover such a vast area. You said that you might be able to help. If you have a possibility to find them, I am ready to pay the price, he ended with a plea. Any price? Seth asked calmly, but his voice cut the atmosphere like a cold gust. Xiongpeng clenched his fists in determination as he looked the Tower Master in the eyes. As a sect leader, I was often forced to neglect my role as a grandfather. But right now, I will not hold back, or any chance to repair my relationship with Xiaoya will be gone forever. I'm ready to pay any price. Seth had asked because he had a very specific idea as he was reminiscing his past. I want meteoric iron as much as possible. At least 15 bars this size, Seth said, and a bar of tempest ore the size of a brick appeared in his hand. Xiongpeng looked shocked when he heard the amount and saw the size. What would you need so much earth-grade material for? He asked, short of breath. Seth understood that he asked out of shock, not because he tried to lower the price. Well, once I refined it, the first thing would be a new suit of armor for one of my subordinates, Seth answered the question leisurely. That was right, it was his first thought when he heard that the sect master was willing to pay. He wanted to secure more meteoric iron because it was already proven that it could be refined to special bones of Seth. The blacksmith could not think of a better material to substitute the blood of Mahis in the slaughterer's set. As long as he could secure enough base material, Ortega would soon be fitted with a worthy set of armor. In Seth's imagination, the dark grey of the bones of Seth would perfectly fit with the venomous pair of Kapesh. Using the meteoric iron would also increase the chance for the items to develop an ego. If Ortega's slaughterer's set had an ego, it might become even better than the original. Especially, if he was lucky with the random effects of the bones. With an excited smile, he stroked the finished lucky trinket. A suit of armor? Made from high earth-grade materials, Xiongpeng repeated speechless. Despite their lavish robes and ostentatious get-up, it seemed like a proper suit of armor sounded like lavish excess to these cultivators. What does he mean with earth-grade this and earth-grade that? Seth asked, ignoring the floundering eagle. I never mentioned it, since you wouldn't have had any use for our way to rank artifacts and materials, Yu answered friendly. While Xiongpeng was still trying to find his calm, Master Mountains explained to Seth how the cultivators categorized their stuff. In general, it was only slightly softer and more complicated than the one the system used. The grades they used in general were mortal, spirit, earth, and heaven grade. Each of these grades were again split into low, medium, high, and peak ranks, making the differences at the border of the grades flowing. They roughly corresponded to the system's rating, whereas mortal grade was common to uncommon items, spirit grade was uncommon to rare items, earth grade was rare to epic, and heaven grade was epic/relic to legendary rated. Since cultivators had other priorities, their grading would sometimes differ from the system. The people of the voracious cloud continent saw more worth in powerful and useful traits, so their grading mirrored much better the final use of the thing or material, compared to the system which judged by requirements needed to create or work with it. I see, so this would also be an earth grade material? Seth asked, waving the Tempest copper around. Yes, this is why I didn't see the need to mention it to use. Everything I saw in Minasmar was high to peak earth grade or even heaven grade. There was no need to mention it, Yu said, a little embarrassed. Are you being serious? Xiangpeng asked after calming down enough to listen in on the conversation. Yet. How much meteoric iron does your sect have right now? Yu asked. He knew his friend's conflicts in belief. Their world was very vast, but with many people attaining various degrees of longevity and even immortality, most resources of their land were already scarce. Getting their hand on high earth grade materials was a fortunate encounter or a monetary burden. Yu, for example, had found the meteorite iron himself, while he had bought the other items he gave to Seth from an auction. Xiangpeng swallowed hard. Maybe enough for 10 bars of that size, he answered quietly. Don't worry, I will pitch in for the rest, Yu assured his friend. Seeing their reaction, Seth felt a little confused. This was just the start of his demands, but the old men already seemed quite troubled. He had hoped for truckloads of materials. Did he have the wrong impression of the voracious cloud continent? Seth thought about it for a moment. He had seen this as his chance to get more exotic materials from the voracious cloud continent, but just 10 billion Argentine pesos of epic metal seemed like a steep price to them. Could I talk with my advisors for a moment? He asked for the two old men to go to the adjacent rooms, while he asked Mary, Lena, and Love about their next steps. Are you sure you want to go that far? Mary asked, a little worried after he shared his plan. I think it is a wise choice, Love appraised Seth's idea. I really hope their help is worth it, or this will be a great loss, Lena said after a moment. After they talked about the specifics, they called Yu and Xiangpeng back in. I see that the voracious cloud continent is not as prosperous as I was led to believe. So, we came up with something else. The meteoric iron stays unchanged. In addition, I want another of those demonic slime cores, or similar materials to craft spatial equipment. Apart from these, we hope for your continued support in the future, especially during the Pythian Games. The faltering eagle shook a little when Seth added the spatial material, but he seemed relieved when it ended with the request for an alliance. In the end, the people you recommended really didn't abuse the situation to strip an old man off his last pair of trousers. And you will find my daughter in exchange, he asked hopefully. I can't guarantee that. By all we know, she could have fallen through a portal and into another world. However, I can guarantee you that you will find that our efforts will fit the price, the bard assured him with a sweet voice. Xiangpeng looked over at Yu again and saw his old friend nod. All right, I agree. Please find my granddaughter. Chapter 1045 Jumping to my bones. Of course, since we will be allies, I will show you your money's worth, Seth answered with a mysterious smile. Others may have been worried about the distance to the mountain range and the dangers lurking in its shadow. However, Seth already had a plan. A great one at that, which would be quick, effective, and cost him almost no time. On this matter, I would also like to talk about the continued support of my luminous mountain sect to Minasmar. Yu linked himself into the conversation, and it was finally time for him to tell his story and explain the reason for his continued absence. This explains a lot, Seth muttered after Master Mountains shared with them the changes on the voracious cloud continent. How so? Xiangpeng asked, a little clueless. Despite being the sect master, he had not been informed about the fact that his very home world had made a deal with some ancient evil from beyond space. Lately, the system has started to display the stats of cultivators and items, using some of your vocabulary, too. Since we can use appraisal on you and your items, it's an obvious sign that the system has scanned and categorized you, the blacksmith explained, but only Lena really understood what he was talking about. It was like with the weapons he created from the angel of the theocracy of chains. It was a material that did not belong to the system, created by a god opposing the system god. This was why the options had to be painstakingly explored before they could be registered, quantified, and acknowledged within the system. It was no different for foreign creatures like the abomination Seth and the others had met in the fog world beyond Y City. Or the Dwatheta from beyond that fog world. The system probably would not have been able to collect the data this quickly without the cooperation of their governing entity. Be it as it may, this is why there is no more unified threat to be feared from the cultivators. At this point, you just have to worry about individual factions and their hunger for power, Master Mountain concluded. Is that why you quickly brought your friend here and suggested an alliance with your sect, too? Seth asked with a chuckle. Yes, I won't lie. Apart from considering you a friend, I have a great impression of Mina's march. While others are blinded by greed and adventure, I would like to secure the best this world has to offer first, a lucrative relationship with Mina's Mar, the old man admitted. This was what Seth liked about you. He was neither pretentious nor did he hide his intentions. All the while he didn't play with open cards to deceive them either. To the bard, this was a sign that you trusted them not to misunderstand him, as much and they trusted him not to try and take advantage of them. However, Seth sighed. We will have a lot to talk about then, I guess, he said. Another day when he wouldn't be able to return to the workshop and finish the blueprints for the Colossus. At least there was one thing the blacksmith was able to look forward to, as they started working out the alliance contracts. Cinema Dimension. There was a slight commotion going through the audience. Is that true? You made a deal, some of the gods around asked. What is so weird about making a deal? All of you made a deal with me, the Starry Robe asked back with a disinterested voice. But not about adding a world to the Pathworks. You never let anyone influence you on what worlds to pick, another muttered. And what makes you think I would let anyone question my decisions? The robe countered, the raised eyebrow was audible. However, seeing that the commotion wasn't subsiding, the system god decided to give a short explanation. I connected the voracious cloud continent to the Pathworks, in exchange for adding their info to the system. However, they aren't members. Neither players nor monsters. They have no system support or privileges. Nothing changed for them. What happens next is not influenced by me. While the system god was dropping what sounded like a serious foreshadowing, not all gods had their attention on him. Seth, sitting beside Hephaestus, was gloating. Cuckoo, look at him, immediately jumping to my bones. Even the ring with Hades' blessing is only meant to improve the material I bestowed on him, he teased the god of craftsmen, who looked relatively grumpy in return. Instead of using the epic silver Hubert had given him to refine legendary Olympian silver, the little blacksmith was all over the place to get his hands on some epic iron and make special bones of Seth. Don't be so happy about it, it's not because it's better, but because it fits the blueprints someone forwarded to him, the lame one huffed, giving Mahis the stink eye. I invested a lot in Mike. I had to make sure he would have the best fitting armor, the lion god tried to justify himself. There is no need to explain to him. If he is so mad that the little blacksmith is using the materials and blueprints of another god, he should have forwarded some of his own to him. You can't blame him that he is using the best, a newcomer commented a little smugly. You shut up, you untalented cur. Just you wait, he barked at the man from the third row. Right, you shut up. No comments from the cheap seats. Seth joined the bashing. The Heliopolian creator god fell silent when he was suddenly shot from his own camp. After dealing with the uninvited third party, the god of chaos and the god of craftsmen kept bickering on their own. What in the world are these? Xiongpeng and Master Mountains exclaimed in unison. After using teleportation together with Seth, another fascinating technology to the two, they were now standing outside Little Sigma, the first tree station. Staring at the sky, they looked at Seth's search party. During the time they spent talking through the treaties together with the girls, Seth had sent a messenger to collect the ones stationed across the district of Mina's March. 700 giant dragonflies were blotting out the sky and blocking the sun. They were the aerial strikers Seth had created from the dragonflies of the hive. The insect dungeon they had fought during their first trip to the Holy Land. All of them were Besouled corpse puppets of enormous strength and speed. With their incredible eyesight, they would have an easy time, looking for someone from the sky, even in the hard-to-traverse and chaotic mountain range. Apart from the aerial striker, there was also a group of golem knights. They were the knights who worked under Wolfram and had managed to develop an ego and wisdom. They would take command of the strikers, during the search. I believe it would be best if you two accompany them to the north. We wouldn't want your disciples to attack them on accident, right? Seth asked friendly. Although the dragonflies would be able to heal with time, the region was already dangerous enough without their allies attacking them. You are right, I will go along with. Go along? Do you really think you can keep up with them? Just ride them. The blacksmith interrupted him. Ride them? Xiangpeng asked unsure. Mounts existed on the voracious cloud continent, but usually, they didn't come in the shape of giant insects. It was a sign of bad taste for someone to choose a massive dung beetle, or a huge dragonfly with the sickles of a mantis. Nobody will see you, just hop on, you teased him, already seated on one of the creatures. Hesitating, Xiangpeng approached the aerial striker standing beside him. I guess, I don't have a choice, he exclaimed as the golem under him erupted into the air. He had barely taken a seat when the creature rose with incredible speed. Now that that's dealt with, the blacksmith turned around and returned to the city. With all urgent matters settled, he could finally turn his attention to his projects. Chapter 1046 Temple of Persephone. Illyrian. 2 knights entered the exotic city under the burning rays of the sun. One had a slender build, wearing a pristine black armor with a bright glossy shine, like crystal. The other was taller and more buff. He wore a bright armor showing signs of wear, of an arduous journey. The city was built from beautiful white marble and sandstones, and the people on the streets wore colorful, clean robes, as they led their everyday lives. Faced with the 2 intrusive elements, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Hey, aren't they? PSHT. Not so loud. They may hear you. But what are they doing in the city of the Maiden? Whispers could be heard in the crowd of idle citizens. Gazes on the street recognized the 2 travelers, as their appearance was already well known in the kingdom of Ithaca. In a cafe at the side of the road, a young man observed the effect of the knights on the crowd with interest. After the 2 newcomers passed by, the youngster leaned over to his uncle who he visited today. The man was slowly sipping his tea, unperturbed by the slight commotion. Uncle, what is it with those 2 knights, that everyone is reacting like that? The country bumpkin asked. His uncle sighed. How can you be such a hick? Are you actively avoiding news at the backwater place your father took my sister to? He complained a little before he started explaining. They are a pair of S-class adventurers that appeared from nowhere and have been making quite the name for themselves as they traveled around. The knight wearing the black, glossy armor is actually a woman, though nobody ever saw her face. She was given the frightening adventurer name Mother of Monsters because she summoned hordes of dark creatures to her command. The taller knight is a guy and acts as her bodyguard in the city and during battle. He is called the Rooting Fire because he wields a flame sword that can stop enemies from moving while they are burning. They have single-handedly stopped a monster wave that was about to swallow the south of Ithaca. They were the ones who stopped that, he asked shocked. I'm shocked you even know about the monster wave. Yeah, they were the ones to stop it and they did a lot more, the uncle said and kept telling his nephew the story of the 2 knights. In the meantime, Evie and Edward, the people in question, were finally about to reach their destination. The city of the Maiden was a big city, housing the Temple of Persephone in this world. Their original plan was to come here first. However, the system god's randomization had thoroughly disrupted their plans. They didn't have the resources to directly teleport to another world like the team for the evaluation did to get to Krina. They just hoped the interference would not royally fuck them over. It was all they could do at the time. Well, their hopes were dashed and the randomization did its worst. When they arrived in Illyrian, the teleport dropped them into the forest of darkness on the southern coast of this continent. A horrible place and definitely something Evie wouldn't call a forest. It was like the weird and twisted ink version of a forest, filled with monsters that looked like nightmares of the deep sea. It was clear that the whole southern tip was corrupted by an eerie power. Only after escaping from that disturbing place and entering a village in the kingdom of Ithaca, did they find out that this forest of darkness was allegedly claimed by the sea gods during a great calamity. A retribution against the former natives of that land. Here, they also found out where exactly they were and how hard the teleport had screwed them. Their starting point could not have been any further away from their destination unless they had been dropped to a different continent altogether. Starting from the south, where they had encountered the nightmarish monster stampede, they endured a string of mishaps all along their journey. Inadvertently their reputation in adventurer ranks rose. Considering that they wished to gain the blessing of Styx first, before getting their names out, their experience was frustrating at the start. However, they had accepted that this was how things were after about 2 weeks of traveling and started truly experiencing the adventure, instead of hurrying to the city of the Maiden. Only when news of the Pythian Games reached them, did they start to hurry. After all, they all had agreed to return in time for the Pythian Games. The whole reason for their quest was to become stronger and return. They had to meet Styx before they returned, thus they hurried here. Despite the hurry, the journey had taken a month since they heard the announcement. This was the time it took them to reach the city after getting the news. Let's visit the local guild first and see how things are in the city, Evie asserted. They had learned to ascertain the situation in a city first, before doing anything else. The guild was also a good place to get a recommendation for a place to stay at. Their greeting in the Adventurer Guild was not much different from their arrival in the city. Over the past months, Evie and Edward had gained quite a bit of power of existence, raising their levels to 125 and 118 respectively. The rise in level of existence had made their presence more prominent. Being recognized and talked about had become a more or less regular occurrence they became used to. "How may I help you?" the receptionist greeted the two as they stepped to the counter. "We just arrived in the city to visit the Temple of Persephone. We wanted to ask for recent news and a good place to stay," Edward explained. The receptionist's face fell a little. "I'm sorry to inform you, that you probably won't be able to visit the temple anytime soon. They have closed their doors to the public for yet to be announced reasons," he informed them. According to him, it had been 2 months ago, when the high priest suddenly announced their decision. Nobody knew what exactly made them decide so, even cancelling the upcoming spring festival in honor of Persephone. "Oh, it's good we aren't members of the public, Evie chuckled, elbowing Edward, but she didn't say anything more. Edward and the man kept talking a little more about the city's current state, but it didn't seem like there was anything of importance. During their journey, they had learned to pick up on red flags during the conversation with people. "Thank you for the information. We will be leaving now," Edward finally ended the conversation. "Goodbye. Please inform us of the place you will stay once you decide. With your reputation, the guild master might want to meet you later on." Edward simply nodded and they left. The last part was a standard phrase, every adventurer rank A and above would be told on the first time in a new city. It wasn't rare for special quests to exist in towns that were not published in the guild, because they needed at least a party of A ranks to be solved. In those cases, the guild would approach the candidates personally. Of course, it wasn't mandatory, but informing them of their place of residence was like saying that they were interested in such quests, if they came up. The two didn't immediately look for the inns the receptionist had mentioned. Instead, they had to make sure whether what he said about the temple was true. As to whether their identity could get them past those restrictions. The temple was a great building at the top of a hill, in the middle of the city. The central complex was especially imposing. Its mighty roof was carried by many decorated pillars and as far as they knew, there was supposed to be a humongous sculpture of Persephone at its core. As the guild staff said, they were stopped by temple guards in front of the massive gates to the complex. "We are sorry, but we can't let you enter. Even if you are the mother of monsters," the temple guard said sternly. "Not even after I showed you this?" she asked lightheartedly, showing him a black guild card. There were 2 prominent silver letters on its front. "DSS rank," he whispered under his breath. He swallowed hard. If they were SS rank adventurers, then they would have a hard time sending them away. Maybe it was best to inform a priest and let them decide. "Would you give us a moment? I will have to consult a priest in this matter." The 2 guards stayed at the gate, sending a messenger in to ask one of the responsible priests. Meanwhile, the 4 stood at the gate in awkward silence. Finally, the side gate swung open and a man in dark robes stepped out. He was about to speak when he stopped and stared at Evie for half a minute. "I'm sorry for wasting your time, my lady. Please follow me to the main temple," he suddenly said and bowed. Chapter 1047 Ripped from this world. Amaver. Sitting on a foreign throne, wearing a foreign crown, sat a former bandit with a royal frown. To her left stood a slender mage dressed in white robes, her face hidden. To her right stood a white priest in white robes. Her finger played around the handle of her saber, as her eyes swept across the throne room. Gentle sunlight fell in through the broken roof and splintered walls. The tiled floor, covered in old leaves and encroaching vines, was littered with corpses and painted red in blood. Phaenis sighed, taking in the fallen glory of ruin, that had been occupied by ogres and even led by an ogre king, using the ancient crown, found in the crypt of the former king. Slowly, she took the unique item off. "Did you play enough? We should return and report to the guild that the ogre kingdom is no longer a threat," Ferdinand said relieved, seeing her finally drop the act. For a moment he thought the crown had other complicated powers. As far as they knew, the crown was a unique artifact that allowed the wearer with the title of king to use incredible powers. But the healer would not have been surprised if there was another effect like megalomania or something like that. Don't worry, I'm still here. Let's get back to the city and finish the quest. Faina stopped playing around with a wry smile as she took off the crown. During her time as a brigand, she had dreamed of the riches of kings and nobles. Sitting here, in the ruins of a fallen kingdom, she had remembered this longing. But with a wry smile, like remembering a childish dream of a younger self. Since then she had experienced greater luxury and comfort than a vain feudalistic system could ever offer her. I think we should return after this quest, Azul suddenly suggested. Well, we'll be a little early, but we did agree that this would be the last quest, anyway, Faina acknowledged. As much as they grew in this world, they looked forward to returning home. Golden Plains. The rebels looked at the scene before them in horror and elation. The steps of the parliament were drenched in blood, the juice of life trickling down the steps like waterfalls. They were littered with the severed bodies of the members of the merchant council. Sitting on the highest step, sat their leader. Her foot was resting on the severed head of the council's champion. The SS rank adventurer who had kept stood behind the high chamber and supported their tyrannical reign with an iron fist. Her armor was dyed red and black with blood, but her spear shone in a pristine silver light. She was also an SS rank adventurer, the Wise Spear. Months ago, they had hired her for protection and advice, but they had quickly made her the leader of the rebellion, as her decisions and ideas had always proven to be correct. Her leadership on the field was impeccable and their plans proceeded smoothly. However, things had changed 3 weeks ago and the Wise Spear had quickened their plans as if there was a deadline she had to keep. Looking at her status, Monique thought about how to continue. There were 5 weeks until the Pythian Games. She had to round up these people and set everything in place for them to govern themselves from now on. Her meticulous plans she had crafted with the wisdom of Athena needed thorough adjustments after she quickened the pace. She couldn't help it, 2 months were not enough to topple a government and instate a perfect replacement. She could only use her remaining time to patch things up as best as she could. She was glad that she was able to recruit allies in this foreign world, that she could leave things to. Some were genuine people, others surprising allies with a hidden debt to Mina's march. At least, they would be able to steer this region into a better future. After glancing at the time, her eyes fell on her level, 135. The spear demon had not done what she did to gain levels, as she had been genuinely horrified by the state this country was in when she arrived. Still, she was glad she was able to follow her heart and fulfill the assignment of getting stronger at the same time. How much stronger the others may have gotten. Sitting amidst the mayhem she created, a small smile bloomed on Monique's face, thinking of her return home. Transvaals. A beautiful castle, brightly lit at night. A great ball was going on when the atmosphere suddenly tilted. Armed soldiers and knights stormed the venue. The music stopped, as the crowd of ostentatiously dressed nobles and merchants fled outside. In the meantime, the soldiers surrounded a couple, holding them at spear point. Neither the man nor woman moved, nor did they seem intimidated. What is the meaning of this? The man stepped forward, asking indignantly. I believe I can explain this, a man in a tight, expensive Baroque suit said, his voice echoing in the empty ballroom. He stepped past the ring of soldiers and stood in front of the couple. You are hereby arrested for harming a noble and under the suspicion of aiding various illegal activities in the capital. The man sighed. See, I told you we should have gotten rid of that prince when he tried to touch you. Now they are framing us for shit because you slapped him in the face, James lamented as his gear instantly switched from an elegant suit to his suit of armor. Resistance will only raise your sentence and void your standing at the guild even as S-rank adventurers. The guild will not support criminals that fought nobility, the official claimed. PFF, who needs the guild? Jess asked with a laugh and threw down a golden guild card with a big S in the corner. Her dress had also changed to a reddish suit of armor and a petite wand appeared in her hands. If we hadn't missed the SS evaluation, they wouldn't even dare to pull this stunt, James complained. I won't apologize. We had a wonderful day in bed. You can't deny that. Jess shot back. James blushed. It can't be changed now, anyway. Let's leave these guys with a last legend and return home. James suggested. Just my thought. Are you really going to do this? The whole dukedom will be after you. You will not be able to escape, the official tried to convince them, but it was too late. The milk was spilled, the spells were cast. What were the soldiers here for? They were purely symbolic decorations. They held no sway over the 2's ranks and neither did the official's authority he relied on so much. That night, the party was lit and the castle was blazing. The party guests watching from outside would call it the Great Bonfire of Midsummer. The 2's rank adventurers were searched for weeks after and announced as criminals across the kingdom, but they could not be found. Omnithes. An unwavering darkness had swallowed the village. The shadows had come from the mines, taking them one by one. A week ago they had taken his mother, and yesterday his cousin. Was today his time? His father had pushed them into the hiding space under their hut, where he was huddling together with his sister. All they could hope for was that they wouldn't find them, and worry for their father. Everything had fallen silent, only their heavy breathing and his sister's silent whimpering filled his ears. He had no idea how long they had stayed down here, but the lids of his eyes started becoming heavy and he had a hard time staying awake. Maybe nothing would happen today? His thoughts were also becoming slower and harder to grasp as he slowly slipped away into sleep. Only for his eyes to jump open, wide awake, when a heavy step shook the floor above them. Dust fell onto them. Was it their father? Had he come back to get them? But the step was so loud and happy. It wasn't like that when their father left. He flinched when suddenly a terrifying rumbling and breaking sound echoed from above. Things were thrown around, shaking the planks above their heads. The boy only hoped who, or whatever it was, would not find the trap door. After the outburst, things went silent again. It stayed quiet for a while. "Boy, you can come out. It's morning. The danger is over," he heard their father's reassuring voice. Relieved, he was about to open the trapdoor when he halted. His lower lip began quivering uncontrollably, as he held in his tears and crying. Their father knew where they hid, he didn't need to call for them. In horror, he realized that they had already fallen victim to the shadows. But it was not the end. "My child, won't you greet me?" This wasn't the voice of their father. This was the voice of their mother. A move beside him brought him back to the moment. "What are you doing? Mother is back. Let's hurry and get out," his little sister whined, as he reacted instinctively and pushed her down, stopping her from moving. "HNGH, mother is gone, Louisa. And father, too. We have to stay silent if we want to survive the night," he insisted. Scratching on the floor above had them fall silent. It came closer and closer. "Oh no, I reached the trapdoor and..." With a subdued screeching, the trapdoor was lifted and they looked into a terrifying face, twisted in a demonic smile. "You should have been a little quieter if you wanted to survive," the creature said maliciously. With a cry, the boy pulled his sister along and he charged into the crawl space under the hut. Behind them, they heard the breaking of the floorboards accompanied by the shadow's amused laughter. Squeezing through the gap, they left from under the house. Holding his crying sister, he ran into the night. "Help! Help! The shadow is," the boy screamed, running into the village. He halted, when he found the village silent, except for the eerily familiar eyes, glowing in the dark. "A hunt can be fun, but it is all futile," the show told them, enjoying the moment as their hope flowed away. It was over, there was no way to run for the two, and the village was full of shadows. Yet they had no eyes for the shadow before them. A massive pair of golden eyes had appeared in the darkness behind the shadow, threateningly floating above its head. Frightened, his gaze was fixed on the eyes, and they seemed to look back at him. "What are you looking at?" The shadow was not amused that his prey had gone silent. When he turned, his superior night vision answered him by giving him the last sight of his life. A giant maw, filled with impressive, pearly white fangs descended on him, ripping him from this world. The next moment a series of dull but loud knocking sounds could be heard, as the shadows were pinned to the huts and ground, by a shower of mighty arrows. In the meantime, the massive tiger reverted back to the humanoid Tijat. "Good, you go the children," Archer greeted Toho as he stepped out of the shadows of the forest. "It's a shame we were late for our last quest, but at least not fully too late," the tigerman lamented. He told Archer and tried to give the children an encouraging smile, but it was more wry than cheery. "Thank you, Big Kitty," the girl hugged his shin without hesitation. "Let's clean up here and bring these children to safety," Archer said unimpressed. "Sure." Chapter 1048 Testing his luck. Northeastern Mountain Range. Xiangpeng was impressed. Although riding an insect scratched at his dignity, he had to admit that they were superior to most common mounts he knew. These dragonflies had easily carried him and the others for 3 days straight, never slowing down, except for passenger breaks. With their incredible speed and stamina, it had only taken 4 days to reach the place his granddaughter was headed to. They had crossed Arjit Noor directly and reached here quicker than expected. They landed at a camp that was set up by a troop of his inner disciples of the Snow Falcon sect. I didn't expect these creatures to dare fly over the land filled with the chi of death, Xiang Pen commented when they were finally on the ground and talking normally. We are not afraid of such things, as they are not truly alive ourselves. Also, Minas Mar has a deal with the inhabitants of that land, so there is no need to worry, the Golem Knight explained elaborately. Although his speech was slightly hacked off, there was no hindrance to understanding it. Master, what are these things? One of the disciples staying at camp asked, unsure what he was seeing. Our new allies that will hopefully help us find your senior sister. We shouldn't waste any time, show us where you and the others have already searched, and then we can concentrate on the place you have not yet checked, Xiang Peng spoke exited. During the flight, the golem had done several impressive things, to show him that these aerial strikers were not just demons of the battlefield, but possessed incredible eyesight and dynamic vision. If these beings were unable to locate her, he would really have to accept that his granddaughter was probably no longer in this place. But he acknowledged that this array of helpers was well worth the box of meteoric iron he sent to the embassy. Don't worry Xiaoye, your granddad will find you. Minas March 3rd weeks before the Pythian Games. In the meantime, Seth was able to have a quiet week, during which nobody came to disturb his work. With the cooperation of Tord, Sivri, and Hone, the team of experts finished and validated the new prints. With the blueprints finished, the blacksmith only needed Hone to resmelt some of the boxes to create new scales for their formations. Once everyone except Sivri had left the workshop, Seth brought out a new box. It was meticulously crafted and covered in exotic carvings of landscapes and scenes with animals and flowers. One of the disciples of the Snow Falcon sect had brought it to the doorsteps of the embassy 2 days ago. The inside was filled with meteoric iron, about enough for 12 brick-sized bars of metal. Since he had to wait for Hone to finish, Seth could go ahead and refine the precious metal into something even more valuable. Finally, his preparation would come to fruition. Seth had always been stocking up on supplies for the ritual for the bones of Seth, the only thing he had been lacking was the fitting iron to refine. At the bard's order, the members had collected gallons of jackal and donkey-type blood from monsters in the dungeon. All of it was at least epic rated in the eyes of an alchemist. With this and the formation he had carved all the way back when he set up the workshop, the only thing he needed to do was wait for the right time of the day, to perform the ritual and bless the meteoric iron with the power of Seth, the god of storms and chaos. All he had to do now was wait for the right time of day. He decided to refine the Olympian silver until then. Unlike Bones of Seth, who needed a special ritual at a special time, Seth was able to refine Olympian silver at any time thanks to the magma forge he had created especially for its production. Hubert had brought an ore different from last time. While the former had the blessing of wind, raising attack speed by 75% and movement speed by 15%, this one was said to have a calming effect and could give resistance to certain status ailments. The blacksmith was looking forward to how this would translate once it was refined. Seth was especially intrigued by it, because the calming effect might be of use to counteract the negative side effects of the lunacy and madness effects that Earth's Ithilden brought with it. In that case, Seth was deliberating on making a jewelry set made of this new material mandatory for anyone with a set of lunacy. Though, these projects would probably have to wait since Seth had more pressing matters that drew his attention. With idle thoughts of what was to come, the blacksmith finished the first bars of the new material. Olympian silver, crafting material. Legendary. Olympian silver refined from tranquil silver found in the resting plains of Ishidal. The refinement has further condensed the calming effect on the mind to a great degree. This didn't sound bad at all. Seeing how the calming effect was said to have been strengthened, Seth had high hopes for the effect it would have on the items later. Looking at the clock, he realized that it was time. He set refining the rest of the silver aside and hurried to the adjacent room, where the magic circle for the ritual of Seth was waiting for him. Before he started, he brought out the amulet of the Nightcrawler. Although luck was a lot more important during the crafting process of an actual item when using Bones of Seth, it wouldn't hurt during the ritual, and this was something he had wanted to test but had not had a chance to before. He had already tested around with the ring's new power and precious things, as he needed all the luck he could get. He went from system currency to credits, to common jewelry and items, to better stuff he and Sivri had made. The general trend was that he got his money's worth. Sacrificing something that could be sold for 1 gold, also had the effect of 1 gold. Monetary worth worked reliably, but Seth also found out a little more. Value was not only based on the hard currency. However, there was also another definition for precious. Would something precious to him, something he cared for, have more effect? He had not dared to test it before, but this was a good chance. This was why he brought one of his older items, the amulet of the Nightcrawler. It was one of his first items. He had gotten it when his journey had just begun, and it was the reason why he had always made sure to have a night vision effect on his equipment. It was not incredibly precious, it was actually quite cheap, but it had sentimental value. Seth activated Pot of Gold, the power of the ring, and the necklace vanished in a rain of glowing specks. He was notified that his luck was raised by 15 points, for 15 minutes. A lot more than a simple gold coin, despite selling for maybe a few silver coins. It worked, but it was also a tug at his heart since he had just lost something he was slightly attached to. This was a method to use the ring Seth was probably going to avoid since there were not that many things he had left that had a high sentimental value to him. Losing one to experimentation already hurt enough. He sacrificed another 7 gold coins, raising his luck by 35. With a clean bonus of 50, he started the ritual. Chanting the invocations, the blacksmith poured the epic blood of a dune jackal and the epic blood of a dragon donkey into the grooves that were carved into the floor. The iron was placed at the center of the circle. When the 6th hour of the new day began, the blood in the grooves started to glow brightly as it evaporated and filled the pile of meteoric iron in the middle with power. This went on for maybe 15 minutes before the formation finally quieted down again. Bones of Seth, crafting material. Special. Meteoric iron, possessing a mysterious will, blessed by the power of the god of chaos and destruction, Seth. It has reached the highest quality achievable, possessing a destructive will. It possesses chaotic properties changing between destruction, desert, and battle strength. Surprised, Seth found that the improved lucky trinket was already at work previously. The attributes were ranging between destruction, desert, and storm. But the storm was now substituted by Seth's battle strength. Quite satisfied with the outcome of his day, Seth finally returned to his bed sometime in the early morning. After staying up all night, refining legendary materials, nothing held him back from quickly falling into sleep. It was late noon when he regained consciousness. What woke him was not the gentle shaking of the communication orb, but the blaring of his phone's ringtone. Hone? Why are you calling me on the phone? You wouldn't pick up the orb. I tried every hour since afternoon. I'm done with the scales. Everything is ready. This seemed very important to you, so I thought I would inform you, as quickly as I could, the dwarf added warmly. Everything is ready, he asked, still fighting the drowsiness. Yes. Everything is ready. I'll be at the workshop in a moment, wait for me. Entangled in the blanket, the blacksmith tried to hurriedly stand up and get off the bed. Kicking and struggling, he finally got the persistence thing off his body. With a mighty step, he got out of bed, only to lose balance and keel over. Mid-fall the tower teleported him to the workshop, where he barely caught his step. Tord, Sivri, and Hone were already standing in position, ready to witness the fruits of their labor as Seth would bring everything together. Are you ready? Everything is ready, the dwarfs said in an amused choir. Hearing their answer, Seth gave them a nod and led them to the Golem Forge, to witness greatness. Chapter 1049 Colossus of Roads. The group of craftsmen rode Puffles away from Minas Mar, to Seth's practice valley. Despite having a massive hangar for making big golems, they still had to get outside for this project. The valley where Seth had tested the Devil's Wheel Fiddle and helped Love had been thoroughly flattened in the past and perfect for the first step. To summon the Golem Forge on a colossal scale. With the size it needed to work on a colossal body, it even overshadows the peaks of the mountains, just outside the range of the bard's practice. All materials were prepared. All of their inventories were bursting with crates of bronze scales. Seth also had the king's colossal. He had also deliberated on using foreign bones to substitute the ones cut during the battle, however, he had found a way to have the Golem Forge mend these bones. The cute of the space magic was so clean, that the chance of a structural weakness in the mended area was very small. After summoning the massive forge, Seth loaded the blueprint for the Colossus of Rhodes into the crafting station, which was adapted from his idea of scaled golems. Seth and the 3 dwarfs had poured a lot of planning into the blueprint to create various greater formations, using the enchantments of the already finished scales, as well as new ones and some made of other materials. Placing the materials in the station's inventory posed a small problem, as the body itself barely fit after emptying it from the materials and bodies still stored inside. In the end, they were only able to fit the body in a handful of crates into the station. Seth imagined how they would have to feed it crates with materials as the golem forge worked. Like stokers who had to shovel coal into a steam engine, but they would have to shovel materials into the crafting station. Of course, it was just an intrusive thought. Once the forge started working, the body would be on the crafting station, not in its inventory. At that time they would be able to load up the space with the remaining stuff. Apart from the scales and the body, there was also a more recent addition to the plan. 5 of them to be exact. Tord and Grant, their enchanter, had spent some time studying the core reactor Lydia had given him. The 5 cores Seth brought out were the result of their research. Compared to the damaged original, they were not as complicated or intricate, but they were much easier to integrate and use as power sources. Even Minasmar had only 5 of these giant monster cores needed to make them in storage, as they had next to nobody who had a use for them. They were usually a material sought after by enchanters to power their formations and enchantment. One could also carve it into the nucleus of a staff or wand, but there were better materials for that. It was a good thing that the Colossus would not rely on these. They were simply an additional power-up. The golem itself would be powered by the arrays of formations that covered its body. They only added the cores as an extra boost or backup. Okay, everything is ready. Shall we start? Seth asked the others in excitement. The 3 craftsmen nodded. Especially Tord, who was fascinated by the process since his first time seeing the forge in action. Will the interesting thing finally come? Puffles asked sarcastically. The nightmare centipede was not impressed by the massive golem forge. Yes, I'm starting the crafting now. The massive machine turned on right after he said it. Magical lights came to life as the golem forge adjusted to the shape and size of the colossal king. Held by massive mechanical arms and clamps, the naked body of the Colossus appeared inside the golem forge. Syringes and claws began their work on the corpse, as the first step was mending the damage and turning it into a corpse puppet. The sight was underwhelming. Why is it so slow? Puffles innocently voiced the thoughts nobody dared to utter. While the scale went up, the speed it was working at didn't. What they perceived as incredibly fast on humanoid size, now seemed to be excruciatingly slow. At this pace, it could take over a week just to mend the damage and reinforce the body, Seth lamented. It was unsure whether the golem forge would be able to finish the work before the Pythian Games began. Not only that, this meant the golem forge was out of commission until the Colossus was finished. And Seth couldn't move it in the meantime. I also can't just leave it here. I would need someone to guard it, he muttered. Not me, the Ivisor reacted quickly. Another 3 not me, could be heard from the 3 dwarfs, motivated by Puffles' exclamation. Don't worry, I wasn't going to ask either of you anyway, he said and took out the communication orb. Heads? Come to my current position. Seth called secret weapon I. The supermassive golem Cerberus had crafted for weeks. Well, compared to the Colossus it was still just half the size, so calling it supermassive might have been too much. They waited for about 30 minutes before the valley floor started shaking and the golem could be seen on the horizon. In the meantime, Seth had placed all the materials in the forge. Everything would run automatically from here on out. You stay here and make sure nobody interferes with the golem forge. When the forge ever stops, call me. Got it? The blacksmith instructed. The massive golem nodded 8 times. Sorry for the disappointment, guys. I didn't think it would take that long, he apologized to the others embarrassingly. Of course, Seth didn't expect it to be super quick, but estimating several days just for the mending, not including the crafting process, was far outside his expectations. Don't worry about it, Tord patted his shoulder. The Dwarven Master was happy enough to have witnessed the massive golem forge and Minasmar's secret weapon NR.1. Can we go back now? I'm bored. The Ivisor rent his heart without a care. Sure, let's go back, Seth agreed with a sigh. Maybe it was just him who was disappointed? He had been looking forward to it and his expectation of a spectacular performance had blinded him to the time aspect of it. Slightly depressed, Seth returned with the rest of them on Puffles. He would definitely get double portions when they went for dinner later. It was that kind of day. Northeastern Mountain. Old Man Xiong, the aerial strikers have found a clue, the Golem Knight informed the master of the Snow Falcon sect. After another week without signs, The old man was about to lose his mind. On Earth, people would say that the chance for a missing child being found alive was next to zero after 24 hours, much less a few days. Xiaoya had been missing for 3 weeks now. On the other hand, she was a grown adult and cultivator. Not only were cultivators a lot harder to kill, but Xiangpeng had an advantage other parents and grandparents didn't have, her soul lamp. Despite precariously flickering, it was still lit, which meant that there was no doubt about his granddaughter being alive. "Where is it?" he asked for the clue. The golem signaled him to follow and the two flew off on 2 aerial strikers. When they first arrived, the mountains were swarming with monsters. Now most of them were slain by the sickle-swinging dragonflies, or fled at the sight of the flying death. The place they came to was a misty and deep gorge at the side of a mountain. It was hard to see inside, but with the guidance of the golem, the sect leader noticed the signs of battle on the floor and walls of the gorge. He was about to ask something when the golem answered his question. "They found some remains that had the symbol of your sect. They are not in a good condition." Xiangpeng nodded grimly. "Show them to me." The knight took the lead and went to the place the dragonflies indicated to him. The old man's face became even more serious when he saw the desecrated bodies of his disciples. Despite something seemingly gnawing off their faces and ripping apart their bodies, he could recognize them. "Did you place them like this?" he asked, seeing their bodies neatly lined up. Compared to the state they were in, this gesture seemed almost mocking. The golem shook his head. "They were like this when they found them." "But who?" "I may be able to explain, human." There was a voice from the mist. When they looked over, a short figure stepped close enough for them to see it. A dwarf. Chapter 1050-Hopes. A failure. The blacksmith thought disappointed. Before he began on another serious project, he thought of doing something relaxing, which was experimenting with the 3 geese holding soul pieces he had refined out of the 4 souls from Y City. In the beginning, Seth had held especially high hopes for the soul of the shell coat, which held the geese of not losing stamina in the water, in exchange for only being able to feast on sentient beings. However, it turned out to be a failure. After creating a small water golem from the soul piece, using Forgebrown's original golem formation, he remembered an important detail. Golems had no stamina. Stamina was something for beings of flesh and blood, just like eating. Golems ran on mana and had no need for food. The geese was absolutely useless on the water golem, even if it was technically active. What else was there? When Seth infused it into a ring, the restriction was applied to the wearer. His reaction was obvious. Who would want a ring of unlimited stamina, in water, if it made the consumption of sentient beings necessary? Cannibals, of course. Or maybe there was a workaround for what sentient beings were. Then he had a flash of genius. The solution was as simple as it was brilliant. One could just take off the ring for eating. With the geese attached to the ring and not the soul, one could avoid the cost, by taking it off. With this realization, the soul fragment holding the geese became slightly more precious, but he would have to think a little more about what to do with the soul. When golems ran on mana then, of course, the geese of not losing mana was pretty enticing, right? Yes, it was. But it lacked the charm of tricking the restriction of the power. The forest scrat did not lose mana in forests. While he could make a golem of water and argue that it was always in water because it was made of it, he could hardly make a walking forest that would still count as a forest. Although he couldn't think of a golem that would count as a forest in a forest, the tree stations were undoubtedly forests. Seth thought that if he used the soul of the forest scrat correctly he could make a golem that was not losing mana inside the tree stations. Was what he was hoping for, but after some testing around, Seth found that this had more restrictions than the obvious one. The mana was seemingly unlimited, like a mana bar that would not empty. However, the maximum of the mana bar was also restricted, limiting how much mana could be drawn at once. Seth was unable to enlarge said mana bar, despite fusing souls into the forest scrat's soul. The test golem he used the soul on, had a fixed mana source of 1500 mana. It was a limit set by the geese. This meant the forest scrat was unable to use skills or spells that needed more than 1500 mana at once. Otherwise, how could the golems have caught it alive? Still, the geese had its use. Although the golem's power output would be limited, it would be able to repeatedly use skills and magic that cost below 1500 mana without any worry. That was no small amount of mana. There was also magic that could stack up power by channeling mana, but those had long casting times. Despite the limit, it would still be a golem that would never stop moving inside a tree station. And what if he added a secondary energy source or storage? After giving it a serious thought, Seth found that the best option was to refine and modify its body in the golem forge, once it was free again, and fuse it back in there. Repairing the body also cost a golem mana. The better the material, the more mana it took to repair. Taking the geese into account, it was better to make the body from a material that was cheap to repair. With the forest scrat's body made of rare rated wood, the golem would be able to heal quickly, no matter how great the damage, or how often it happened. Prompted by the find of the shellcoat's soul, Seth revisit the portion of Dimblood's soul he had refined out. The geese allowed the leper Shan to become invisible, but he had to serve the person that caught him until he managed to escape. The blacksmith's first thought was turning it into some kind of suicide spy golem, using the effect of the geese, to trigger a kill effect of a soul contract and retrieve the soul that way, if the golem was caught. But what about a ring of invisibility? There were already enchantments that could make the user invisible, but it was still worth a shot since the invisibility in this case had no restrictions like mana cost or special actions. Expectant, he fused the soul into a test ring. Disappointing. Ring of invisibility. Uncommon. Durability 150. 1. The ring can turn invisible. A simple ring made by Master Smith, the first master goldsmith of Earth. Using mysterious means, it was imbued with special power. Requirements: the ring will serve whoever finds it until it is lost again. Seth had no idea what the rules were. Why did the stamina geese apply to the user, but the invisibility applied to the ring? How did that translate? If even there were uses for a ring that could become invisible, what was the point if it would actively try to become lost and eventually find a new owner? Seth decided not to bother with it. Suicide spy golem it is, he thought to himself. Lastly, there was the soul of the troll. His first thought was that it had the highest promise as a stone golem. The problem was the point of turning into brittle stone in the sunlight. Even if Seth made it from some special mineral, it would turn to brittle stone in direct sunlight. The geese gave a 90% immunity to physical damage, but it would be weak to magic if it was brittle stone. The same was true for items. When infused into a shield or armor, it would turn to brittle stone in the sun. Like with the damage immunity of his dragon scale armor, the effect only applied to the item itself, not the wearer. So he couldn't just make an item for someone like Mina, who could cloak it in darkness all day around, or only use it in dark places. Then what if he completely doubled down on the darkness aspect of it? Something that would only act in the darkness and be shrouded in. Before he could get to it, he got a call from Master Mountain and his friend. "You found her?" he asked half surprised. "She what?" he asked fully surprised. "Yeah, she and the survivors of her group were rescued by a group of dwarfs living in this mountain range," you revealed to him. It seemed that the granddaughter and her companions had faced a mysterious creature they were unable to defeat. On their escape, they were chased into a deep gorge. They were ready to accept their destiny and got ready for a final battle when the dwarfs found them and offered shelter. The gorge they had run into turned out to be one of the back entrances to their kingdom. They call themselves Stoneborn and are a little different from the dwarfs I have seen at Minas Mar and Delta, but undoubtedly dwarfs, he assured him. Dwarfs settling on Earth? This was the first time Seth heard of that. Well, it was not like there was a lot of news about the no man's land away from the remaining settlements. Did they immigrate here? Seth asked. You had mentioned they were different from the dwarfs he saw in Delta. If that was true, there was a possibility that. I also asked that. It's a no. They say they had always been living under these mountains, but they have a huge gap in their memories, the cultivator shared with him. What you indicated with that, was that Seth's suspicions were most likely true. These Stoneborn were dwarfs that originated from Earth itself and appeared because of the awakening of the slumbering realm, just like the weird creatures and monsters that had appeared in Y City. The difference was, that they seemed to be the first friendly addition to their nightmarish world. Well, that was not completely true, there was also Strike Forbone the blacksmith had met in Y City. Maybe this was a tiny sliver of hope, that not everything that was awakening was out for their lives. Actually, they are extremely fascinated by your golems and would like to meet you, you added. Then tell them to send an envoy, Seth said resolutely. He wasn't going to leave home at this point. Especially not when the destination was that far away.